The midterm elections are less than 1 year away, and all metrics point to a Democrat defeat. You've got redistricting. People think that just because the Republicans were able to shape the districts, that's going to give them a huge advantage, and they're probably right. You also have the polls showing that independent voters favor the Republican candidates by 2-1. The Democrats may have been able to stave off some of the Trump MAGA revolution, but they haven't been able to stop the greater movement, and you end up with candidates like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz, who are despised by the establishment, but they're very, very popular. I think 2022 is going to be a year of dirty, dirty games. And it would seem that the new strategy for Democrats is to disqualify the people they know they cannot beat. Now, we see this in Donald Trump. The New York Post says Democrats explore barring Trump from holding office over the January 6th riot. But a prominent Democrat lawyer is suggesting they will do the same thing to members of Congress. They know they can't win. They know they can't defeat these particular populist Republicans, so they will disqualify them. I think we're headed towards very dark times. The dirty tricks and games are getting worse than I've ever seen in my life. Now, of course, you have political trickery. You have dirty and dishonest campaign ads. But now we're getting into a whole new level. This is where, and they've probably done it in the past, don't get me wrong, but in my lifetime, they're trying to use legal manipulation to win. And that's scary, especially at a time when people are throwing around the words national divorce or civil war. A couple days ago, we had Marjorie Taylor Greene on the Timcast IRL podcast. She was amazing. She was very lovely. I don't agree with everything she has to offer, and I think there's certainly room for criticism, but she told us how she went down to Congress and was forcing roll call votes. She was making it so that all of these members of Congress had to actually come down and cast a vote. Believe it or not, they weren't doing that. They despise her. They hate her. Yesterday, one day after hosting her on the show, we were swatted. This means someone called in the police, issued very serious threats, and several, 8+ vehicles, 8+ officers I saw, state troopers, county, city, they all show up. Fortunately, this is a place of business, and our chief technical officer was able to inadvertently intercept the officers and de-escalate before things got bad. I don't know exactly why we got swatted, but considering it came just after we hosted Marjorie Taylor Greene, I think perhaps it was maybe retaliation. Maybe they're trying to cause harm to the show. Maybe they don't like the fact that we are giving a platform to someone like MTG, and that she very well may win again. She may win re-election, and thus she'll be in Congress. There's several strategies they have to try and stop these candidates. I don't know for sure if that's why we got swatted, but I can say having her on the show certainly helps her fundraising. Having, her going on other shows certainly helps her fundraising, and jamming up shows and making it harder for us to work can negatively impact the people that we bring on the show. Well, again, maybe that was just a coincidence. Maybe it was totally unrelated. Or it could be that there are dirty games afoot, because we know in a new story from The Hill that these Democrat lawyers, particularly this one guy, is saying they think there will be disqualification of these individuals. And Marjorie Taylor Greene told us this on the show, saying that there will be a move to disqualify her and other people so that she cannot run for re-election. They may not be able to defeat her or the Republicans, but they can make sure at least a different establishment politician gets in. Now, they're going to do the same thing to Trump, but surprisingly, not surprisingly, but you probably know this because they tried this early last year as well. This is scary to me. When the Democrats realize they cannot win, they start using nefarious tactics, which, in my opinion, will destroy confidence in the system more than it's already been destroyed. And yes, maybe we'll end up throwing around the word civil war. Now, we don't want that to happen. I don't want that to happen. I would love nothing more than to go watch Spider-Man movies and hang out with my friends. But these are very serious issues, and it's happening right in front of us. Let's read the news. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com and become a member to help support my work and the work of our journalists. We have a large team writing news every single day, and they are supported by you guys. When you watch the articles, when you sign up and become a member, it is almost entirely through your membership we're able to have these journalists on staff. As a member, you'll get access to exclusive segments from the Timcast IRL podcast, behind the scenes, uncensored. But don't forget to like this video right now, subscribe to this channel, share this video with all of your friends wherever you can, Facebook, Twitter, whatever social media platform you use. That is how we grow the show. We don't have a big marketing budget. We just rely on word of mouth. If you think we do a good job, please share our work. Now, let's read this first story. And we'll keep the focus on Donald Trump because, he's the big guy, right? Well, actually, I think Joe Biden was the big guy in all those leaked emails, but Donald Trump is the leader of the MAGA movement right now, whether you like him or not. The New York Post says Democrats explore barring Trump from holding office over January 6th riot. A handful of congressional Democrats are investigating whether former President Donald Trump can be prevented from holding elected office again through the application of an obscure portion of the 14th Amendment. Section 3 of the amendment, enacted in 1868, and best known for enshrining the Equal Protection Clause, prevents any government official who engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the U.S. from holding office again. Now, this should be obvious to everybody. If you've been paying attention since last year, this is why the Democrats keep calling it an insurrection. They want the narrative to be insurrection, which is insane. Not a single person has been charged with sedition or insurrection or treason or anything of the sort, let alone Donald Trump. According to The Hill, approximately a dozen Democratic lawmakers have publicly or privately spoken about applying Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to Trump, who they accuse of inciting the January 6th riot that disrupted the congressional certification of the 2020 election results. If anything, the idea has waxed and waned, liberal Harvard Law School professor emeritus Lawrence Tribe told the outlet. I hear it being raised with considerable frequency these days, both by media commentators and by members of Congress and their staff, some of whom have sought my advice on how to implement Section 3. Tribe has met with the staffs of Reps. Jamie Raskin, a member of the House Select Committee investigating the riot, Jerry Nadler, chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz. The offices of all three members did not immediately respond to the Post's request for comment. I continue to explore all legal paths to ensure that the people who tried to subvert our democracy are not in charge of it, Wasserman Schultz said to The Hill. It's unclear what mechanism would be used to apply Section 3 to Trump. Some experts say the House and Senate could vote by a single majority to find the 45th president engaged in insurrection against the government. Others, including Tribe, say the determination would need to be made by a federal court or a neutral fact-finding body. Some left-wing groups are also exploring the possibility of applying the amendment without going through Congress. One such group, Free Speech for the People, has urged state election officials to apply the amendment if Trump decides to run for president again, which would prevent his name from showing up on ballots. Isn't that insane? How many people voted for Donald Trump? 75 million or so? 72? Whatever the number is. Trump is overwhelmingly popular in this country. To use a dirty trick to remove him is to provoke, or is... I don't want to get too inflammatory on this one. It is to drive a stake through the heart of this country, and it will enrage people beyond all recognition. Quote, just as states are permitted, if not required, to exclude from the presidential ballot a candidate who is not a natural-born citizen, who is underage, or who has previously been elected twice as president, so too states should exclude from the ballot a candidate such as Mr. Trump, who previously swore to support the Constitution, but then engaged in insurrection. The group wrote in a letter sent to the chief election officials in all 50 states last summer. They go on to say that Trump was impeached, as we get. While Trump has not formally announced his intent to run for president, he has continuously hinted and is expected to make an announcement following the November midterm elections. I bring you now to a tweet from Marc Elias. He is very well known. He's a Democrat lawyer, founder of Democracy Docket. And he tweets, my prediction for 2022, before the midterm election, we will have a serious discussion about whether individual Republican House members are disqualified by Section 3 of the 14th Amendment from serving in Congress. We may even see litigation. And he tweets this image. Section 3, no person shall be a senator or rep in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the U.S., under any state who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the U.S., or as a member of any state legislature, or as an executive or judicial officer of any state, to support the Constitution of the U.S., shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof, but Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. That's the game they're playing. They know that Marjorie Taylor Greene is insanely popular. She's raising money in record numbers. And they're probably thinking there's no way we beat a Republican in a heavy Republican district with someone as popular as Marjorie Taylor Greene. So what do? Disqualify her. And same is true for Donald Trump. They don't have the power to stop Donald Trump. Now, I think the pandemic was so bad and people were so upset, their sports were taken away and the media pushed that narrative. But this was a one-off. It was their glass cannon, an extremely powerful offense. Donald Trump is the bad guy. Vote for Joe Biden. People did. They did. Now, I certainly think you can take a look at the Time magazine article on the shadow campaign to fortify the election and take a look at the things they were doing. But I think they were able to muster up regular people to blindly vote against Trump. That's what they did. They voted against him. He was anti-elected. What ends up happening is you get Joe Biden, a feckless, pathetic leader who is driving this country into the ground. You get a weak and feckless Congress with no ability to actually get anything done. And the American people have had enough. They're not going to support this any longer. Times they are a-changin', but the establishment will not release their grip. Now they're failing and they're struggling. So instead of going gracefully and saying our time has come, they're saying we will use everything we have, everything in our arsenal of dirty tricks and lawfare to make sure we win. And that's a scary prospect. In this article from The Hill, Jonathan Turley writes, Democrats' loose talk of disqualification still dangerous. This year, the Biden administration joined many in the U.S. in criticizing the mass disqualification of 583 candidates in Iran by the Guardian Council. The Iranian elections are democratic only in the most artificial sense. Electoral disqualification systems are generally anathema to democratic values, but some in the United States are now toying with the idea for the 2022 or 24 elections. While more modest than the Iranian model, the Democratic calls for disqualification are just as dangerous. What is most maddening is that this anti-democratic effort is cloaked in Democratic doublespeak. This week, Democratic lawyer Marc Elias predicted that 2022 would bring a renewed interest in disqualifying Republican members from office based on an obscure Civil War era provision. Elias, the former Hillary Clinton campaign general counsel, is a well-known figure in Washington. Elias has founded a self-described pro-democracy group that challenges Republican voting laws and pledges that will, quote, shape our elections and democratic institutions for years to come. In the age of rage, nothing says democracy like preventing people from running for office. Elias and others are suggesting that rather than defeat Republicans at the polls, Democrats in Congress could disqualify the Republicans for supporting or encouraging the quote-unquote insurrection last year. Democratic members called for the disqualification of dozens of Republicans. One Rep Bill Pascrell demanded the disqualification of the 120 House Republicans, including House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, for simply signing a friend of the court brief in support of an election challenge from Texas. That was a legal challenge to the Supreme Court. Original jurisdiction. Texas said, hey, Supreme Court, we don't like what's going on in these states. That's the right way to go about doing it. And for a variety of reasons, these lawsuits were not seen through. They were dismissed typically on standing. But the right way to go about this is through the courts. The Democrats rejected this. And many said we should disqualify anyone who actually tried to use the checks and balances that we have in this country. And that to me is insane. Turley goes on. These members and activists have latched upon the long dormant provision in Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which was written after the 39th Congress convened in December 1865. And many members were shocked to see Alexander Stephens, the Confederate vice president, waiting to take a seat with an array of the former Confederate senators and military officers. Justin Reed of the North Carolina Supreme Court later explained, the idea that one who had taken an oath to support the Constitution and violated it ought to be excluded from taking it again. So members drafted a provision that declared that no person shall be, I read this already, but it makes sense. If you take an oath to uphold the Constitution and break that oath, I ain't going to trust you to uphold that oath ever again. So no, sorry, I think that makes sense. But this doesn't make sense for Marjorie Taylor Greene or Republicans who want to use checks and balances. It certainly doesn't make sense for Trump. They're lying. They're lying because they can't win. By declaring the January 6th riot an insurrection, some Democratic members of Congress and liberal activists hope to bar incumbent Republicans from running. Even support for court filings is now being declared an act of rebellion. Nancy Pelosi helped fuel this movement before January 6th even occurred by declaring that the Republicans supporting election challenges were subverting the Constitution by their reckless and fruitless assault on our democracy, which threatens to seriously erode public trust in our most sacred democratic institutions and set back our progress on the urgent challenges ahead. January 6th was a national tragedy. I publicly condemned Trump's speech that day while it was being given, and I denounced the riot as a constitutional desecration. However, it has not been treated legally as an insurrection. Those charged for their role that day are largely facing trespass and other less serious charges, rather than insurrection or sedition. That's because this was a riot that was allowed to get out of control by grossly negligent preparations by Capitol Police and congressional officials. While the FBI launched a massive national investigation, it did not find evidence of an insurrection. He goes on. With an ominous midterm election approaching, much of the effort among Democrats on the Hill and in the media has been to keep the enmity alive from January 6th in what seemed almost a hopeful plea. The New York Times recently declared every day is now January 6th. It made this tragedy sound like the political equivalent of a year-round Christmas store. Every day should involve a renewed gift of reminiscence and rage. The saddest aspect of this politicization of the January 6th riot is that many of us wanted a full, transparent, and apolitical investigation. House Republicans rejected that idea, but there remain many questions to be answered, which has not happened. Instead, we have an effort to encode the notion of an actual insurrection through mantra-like repetition. Sure, let me show you. We have this from timcast.com. Watch. Pelosi says January 6th was like somebody in the White House dropped a bomb on the Congress. It was bad. I don't like what happened. It was shocking. But it was not insurrection. It was a bunch of angry people who rioted. That was it. They respected the velvet ropes. Most of these people were let in through open doors when police opened them up. There's video of police waving people in as the barricades get pushed aside. Should these individuals have done it? Of course not. It was wrong. Trespassing? Sure. Attacking officers? Very bad. Yes, charge them. Insurrection? No, I'm sorry. That's absurd. And they're using that word because they want to disqualify Republicans that they cannot defeat, or at least they think they can't defeat. Let me show you this. Congress holds moment of silence in honor of January 6th anniversary. Why? I mean, look at this clip from the Post-Millennial. Democrats hold a vigil for January 6th outside the U.S. Capitol. This is insane. These people are legitimately insane. Why? The only people who died on January 6th were Trump supporters. Only one person had their life taken from them, Ashley Babbitt, and the other people died in accidents, falling a great height or getting stepped on. They tried claiming over and over again that an officer lost his life, but it was unrelated. At least that's what they came out with. It's crazy to me that if the media wants to lie so much, just lie more. But I guess there's a line. Certain information will get out and they can't do anything about it. So they try and frame everything. They try and change the narrative. Now it's worse than you realize. It goes beyond politics. But I want to take you back in time. Take a look at this from Vox. VOX, February 9th, 2021. How Congress can permanently disqualify Trump from office after impeachment. The impeachment process to prevent Trump from running in 2024 explained. This has always been their goal. And they want to do the same thing to Marjorie Taylor Greene, and she told us this. That's their plan. If you can't beat them, use a legal tactic to manipulate the system and stop the American people from getting true representation. What do you want? Let me ask you, what do you want? Do you want corporatist, elitist shills who will manipulate the elections, prevent your vote from actually mattering by disqualifying your candidate so you can't vote for who you really want? Or would you rather have an idiot? I mean, I know there's typically better options than that. You know, if we're talking about, say, AOC and MTG, I don't like AOC. I think her policies are awful. I think she's a liar and a hypocrite. But I think in many ways, she's much better than Nancy Pelosi. Granted, not by enough, I suppose, but in many regards. There's probably several populist Democrats who are a better example because AOC is a bit of a manipulator. So I think she's poised to just become another establishment shill. Marjorie Taylor Greene is a populist. She talks like a real person. She cares about real issues. And, she's made mistakes she's apologized for. I don't think she's perfect. I think she's worthy of criticism. And I've criticized her and many have criticized her in the past. But I would prefer her going into Congress and challenging the system over a neocon who won't even show up to vote. I would prefer a progressive Democrat primarying one of these establishment shills like Pelosi, who will actually show up and make these people vote. Now, hopefully we'll see something like that in the progressive Democrats, but I'm not confident. I'm not at all. Though, full disclosure, I did donate to a progressive Democrat who was running against Nancy Pelosi to unseat her, to primary her, and it was unsuccessful. I'd like to see that happen again. We'll see how things play out, but Pelosi she's been in too long. People in these districts, they just blindly vote Democrat, and therein lies the problem. As for the Republicans, we're actually starting to see this populist wave succeed. It didn't work so much for the Democrats. They held Bernie Sanders back. The establishment retained control of the Democratic Party, but not the Republican Party. This is where I think we're headed. In this story from Politico, we are in a new civil war. About what exactly? Grievous conflicts have been about big things, war, slavery, depression, but this time we just don't like each other. I bring this up again. I brought it up several times because mainstream news outlets are saying we're in a civil war. What would you call it when one political party is citing civil war provisions in the Constitution to bar their opponents from holding office? What would you call that? I don't know. Sedition, maybe? Maybe we can use that to argue they shouldn't be allowed to hold office either. When you have two overarching political factions and disparate factions beneath them, and one side saying, we are not going to try and win an election, we're trying to use legal tactics to prevent you from running in the first place. This is not a constitutional republic we have. We are not electing our representatives when these people play dirty games to prevent us from being able to do so. And that's what they're doing. This right here, if this moves forward, is the death of the union. Look, I know a lot of people have been saying it's hyperbolic to claim there's a civil war, but let me just stress, if there is someone who runs for office and they get elected, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and then for complete BS reasons, the Republicans and the Democrats strip her of her committee assignments, you've got a problem. They are saying to the American people, you're out. And then when they say outright, we're not even going to let you run for office. Then it's no longer a constitutional republic. We're no longer choosing our representatives. They're being chosen for us. Granted, in a largely circuitous method, they're mostly keeping out the people we do want to run and win, and only allowing the people they allow to run and win. And therein lies the very serious problem we're facing. If the American people do not feel they have representation, the American people will not be happy, and it will lead to very bad things. From Daily Mail, Capitol Riot Committee Chair Benny Thompson says lawmakers have evidence that sitting members of Congress gave tours to Capitol rioters the day before they stormed the building. Public tours of the Capitol had been suspended since May of 2022. In the weeks immediately after the riot, multiple Democratic lawmakers accused their Republican colleagues of giving tours to Capitol rioters. I believe they accused Lauren Boebert as well. Part of the panel's work is now to see whether or not we can connect the dots between those tours and the people who broke into the Capitol. They're going to try and make this argument that Republicans let them in, showed them around so they knew where to go. It doesn't make sense. It's a complete bunk narrative because you have that other officer who used himself as bait, they claim, and led the rioters away from where members of Congress were. If these individuals who had broken into the Capitol through the tunnel entrance, fighting with cops, had been given tours, wouldn't they know where to go? Apparently not. Because what the Democrats are doing is they're connecting dots that should not be connected because they're conspiracy crackpots, but they know it probably makes no sense. They just need a pretext so they can say, do not allow these people to run for office, and they may succeed. It goes beyond politics. The New York Times, this is a story from Well, this is a story from yesterday. Corporations donated millions to lawmakers who voted to overturn the election results. 1 year after the Capitol riot, many businesses resumed corporate donations to lawmakers who voted against certifying the 2020 election. They're going to say, at its annual summit on the state of American business late January, officials from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce expressed disgust at the siege of the Capitol that had unfolded days earlier. There are some members who, by their actions, will have forfeited the support of the U.S. Chamber of Congress. Less than 2 months later, the nation's biggest lobbying group reversed course. We do not believe it is appropriate to judge members of Congress solely based on their votes on the electoral certification. In the year since the riot at the Capitol, many corporate giants and trade groups have moved from making stern statements about the sanctity of democracy to reopening the financial spigot for lawmakers who undermined the election. Millions of dollars in donations continue to flow to what watchdog groups deride as the Sedition Caucus, highlighting how quickly political realities shift in Washington. This should be an opinion piece. I mean, seriously. The Sedition Caucus, this is very obvious left-wing framing. And if they wanted to actually report the news, they wouldn't include those things that poison the well. But that's what they do. What they're doing is they're going after, with this story, anybody who provided a donation to these Republicans. And of course, many of these individuals need it. Corporations will make donations. Well, it's not necessarily the corporations. It's high-level individuals within these companies will advocate to their employees, who will then donate to political action committees and to the individuals directly. There's a limit on how much you can give a politician, but you can give to a PAC as much as you want, a super PAC. They're going to go after these corporations. What they're trying to do is homogenize the narrative in the U.S. It won't work. It can't work. There's two different worldviews. There's those of you who watch shows like mine, and there are people who watch CNN and get nothing but bunk fake news. Full disclosure, I'm using Vox, I'm using Politico, I'm using the New York Times as my sources, but I'm digging through them and giving a critical analysis on what's happening. I think the intent is they want to sideline shows like mine. They want to sideline people like you, and they're trying, but it's not working. I mean, in some respects, it's working, right? If they disqualify Marjorie Taylor Greene, they're slowly just trying to excise anyone who is outside the American mainstream. They're willing to protect and preserve anyone who seems likely enough to fall in line. Look at Ted Cruz, called January 6th a terrorist attack. Yeah, he's trying to get in the good graces of the establishment. You see where he's betting. He's betting the right populists will lose. Maybe he's not wrong. Maybe they will disqualify the right. Maybe then the DOJ will go after the remnants of the MAGA movement, accusing them of being terrorists and making up other garbage, and they will destroy this country. All our beautiful Bill of Rights and the Constitution will be sidelined because it's already happening. It's been happening for a long time. This is where we are. They'll go after the businesses who provided any donations. Now, in response to what's going on with January 6th, Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene said, "We are ashamed of nothing." In a statement, quote, Matt Gaetz says, "Congresswoman Greene and I are not here to celebrate January 6th. We are not here to obsess about it, but we are here to expose the truth. January 6th last year wasn't an insurrection, but it may very well have been a Fedsurrection." Yeah, I think there's interesting questions that need to be asked about January 6th, who was involved, and I'm not entirely convinced it was the FBI or something like that. Donald Trump was in charge. His administration was in control to a certain degree of federal law enforcement. But in order to believe that there were federal agents involved in stoking the flames, you'd have to believe that there is a rogue group of individuals in the FBI subverting this country. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. Let's take a position from the left. It's not true. These are just, the good men and women of the FBI trying to stop a terror attack. Okay, well, that means that Trump supporters staged a terror attack. It means that regular people were willing to storm the Capitol and wage insurrection against this country, and they're not going away. Let's say the inverse is true. Let's say Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene are correct, and this was the feds. Well, that would mean that there are rogue operatives in the U.S. government seeking to destroy this country. Pick your side. And then if you refuse to, I would just have one question for you. Where do you think the de-escalation occurs? Do you think that the people who are accusing certain rioters of being feds will shake hands with those who are accusing the other side of being insurrectionists? You think they'll hug and say, "We're just Americans"? I'm sorry, that's naive. We have violence in the streets. We have people getting away with these crimes. We have the right continually being blamed. We have the mainstream media pushing a narrative that is rejected by a large portion of this country. We have in the polls more Americans supporting Donald Trump than Joe Biden, even though the official mainstream media narrative is insurrection. The American people are not buying it. So where does that bring us, man? I don't know. I think it brings us to absolute chaos. I think it leads us down a path that if the Democrats pursue disqualification of Trump or members of Congress, people will snap. They like Marjorie Taylor Greene. I think she's a good person. I think she's got her positions. I think she believes what she says. I think she is a politician. And so, of course, you get that politicking. Some certain answers are going to be political answers where they, want to dodge or whatever. But I don't blame politicians for being political. But she's in a whole different class. She's a lot better than almost every single politician. There's very few that I actually like, and I had not heard much about her. I had not spoken to her before. We had her on the show, and I like her challenging the system, the corruption in the system. I don't necessarily agree with everything she says. I don't think she's perfect, but I like the idea that she's going to go in there and tell Congress what for. And the same is true for people like Matt Gaetz and Thomas Massie and other individuals. I like Rand Paul, but there's so few of these individuals. So when you get some of these people finally in Congress challenging the system, it feels good, even if that's all you get. So if they're to disqualify them or remove them, I think this country will tear itself apart. There is still an opportunity in, coming together, but I don't know how we effectively do it, especially when the narratives are being split further and further apart with social media censorship. The people who could once interact on, say, Twitter are losing the ability to do so because leftists don't want people challenging their ideological narratives. So then they complain, and then Twitter bans the right for saying things like learn to code. Then the right builds alternative platforms, and then Silicon Valley crushes them. Apparently, the reporting now is like, 1 million people? 1 million new users together following all this controversy with Dr. Malone and Marjorie Taylor Greene. This is going to create parallel worldviews. I mean, they already exist, but it's going to get worse. Parallel economies, and that's the path we're heading down. Maybe it'll culminate just before 2028. I don't know. But I think bad things will happen if the Democrats move for disqualification. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up tonight at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastIRL. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you all then.